Hey, HannahMouse1 here. Welcome back to another paperclay sculpting video. In this one, I'll be sculpting the Fellowship of the Rings from franchise Lord of the Rings. Obviously, I'm doing this now because of the new Rings of Power show that's just come out. And because it's so, I'm not going to talk about the show at all during this video, but the video might contain some light spoilers for the original Percy Jackson Lord of the Rings trilogy. So I'm starting off by sculpting Aragorn, who is like the de facto leader of the troupe. He is the king character. So I am having him holding his sword. He has long dark hair and all that, and I'm using cardboard to make the actual sword. Took me a couple tries to get that right, but I did get something that I was happy with. And I'm going to be giving all the characters an incredibly simple paint job. All of the characters, they're not meant to look exactly accurate to the show, but they are meant to look cohesive with each other. And this isn't depicting any specific moment in the show, like some of the characters, or the film, sorry. Some of the characters are from very specific points in the show, others are a bit more generic. This is definitely a more generic one. I give them all their little green elven cloaks that they wear. And yeah, I paint the sword with a metallic silver paint. Any of the shiny areas of cardboard in that I did have to gesso first. And that is Aragorn done. Like you see, I kept it very simple on this one. Then I moved on to Legolas, the elven archer. So yeah, again I make it very simple. I did try and keep the characters roughly in proportion with each other. Like Legolas is very slender, I suppose you'd say. And I of course have him wielding his trusty bow and arrow. Which was a bit of a challenge to do at this tiny scale, but yeah, he has very long hair, so that was something interesting to work with. And I used a paper clip to make the bowstring because that was too thin to use paper clay for. If I tried to do that with Papier-mâché, it would snap or break, so I did have to use a paper clip for that, and I think it did come out pretty great. And I also use a paper clip for the arrow he has notched and drawn. And I have him standing ready to fire. Any areas of metal I gessoed over to allow the paint to adhere properly to it. And while that's drying, I get on with painting the rest of him. I try and use a very consistent colour palette between the characters, just to make it look like a cohesive set. So I use the same green for Legolas's outfit that I used on Aragorn's cape. And obviously he is slightly fairer than Aragorn is, skin tone wise. And I also give him his signature blonde hair. And that is Legolas. Nice and simple. Again, I'm pretty happy with how that one came out. Next, I move on to Gimli, son of Gloin. And yeah. This character is distinctly older looking in appearance, I'd say. So I try to add some stronger facial structures, his cheekbones are quite pronounced, and he is also much more where the other characters are quite tall, and so he's more if you were to draw a shape around him, he would literally fit in a rectangle. So I try to emulate that with my sculpt, and of course he has quite the luscious auburn beard. I give him his signature axe. Again, using cardboard to make the blades because they are so thin that paper clay is just not a viable option for that. So yeah, and then I paint him. I give him the ginger hair, and I use the same skin tone for him that I used for Aragorn. Yeah, I use the same red that I used on Aragorn's clothing. Again, just trying to make it all look very cohesive and consistent. And yeah, I use the same metallic paint for the blade on his axe. Next, I move on to Boromir, who is another man like Aragorn. And because he is played by Sean Bean in the film, he has a given death sentence. So that's how I'm going to be sculpting him, on his knees with 3 arrows sticking out of him. Just because I wanted to add some height variation, and having a character on his knees means that they're not all the same height, which is a nice thing visually. And I paint him with all the same colours that I used on the others. So yeah. His hair's a bit too long really, but you know, Boromir does have quite long hair. It's just, yeah, it's not quite as long as I've sculpted it here. And I use the same mottle green for the cloak that he's given, especially considering it's the same cloak basically that Aragorn's wearing. And that is Boromir for you. Now I'm moving on to Gandalf the Grey. So, you know, pre-resurrection Gandalf. He is the tallest character that I'm sculpt. And I give him his signature wizard's hat and wizard's staff. So, and his cloak is very like long and dragging, so I didn't have to worry about limbs or anything for the most part, which was nice. It's always like limbs are a bit of a pain to sculpt really, and if you can hide that with clothing, it's always great. So yeah, I use a nice light grey for his clothing. This is the only character that like looks significantly different colour palette wise, but that's just because I tried to match him to the character we see in the films. So yeah, this is a Gandalf the Grey. And now we're moving on to the hobbits. This one I think is Merry. Honestly, Merry and Pippin are all but undiscernible in my final sculpture. So yeah, I have him throwing a little rock, because especially early on that is the hobbit's weapon of choice, just chucking rocks at them. Give him his little cloak, and then I give him a nice cursory paint job. So yeah, Merry and Pippin are definitely the least detailed of the ones I make, but they are necessary members of the Fellowship of the Ring, and I don't want to knock that, so yeah. Again, I do use the same reds and greens and browns to keep everything tied together, and I'm pretty happy with how that one came out. So yeah, now I am moving on to the other one, Pippin, let's say. And he's much the same really. There's like, yeah, all his body is very much a squat, but instead of throwing rocks I have him like standing more defensively, just because I wanted to add a bit of variation basically. So yeah, kind of glossed over that one because it is so similar to the others, but yeah. And the paint job is all but identical as well. So yeah, that is Pippin for you. Or Merry, doesn't really matter. Maybe I should have put some more effort into discerning the two, but like even in the film they call each other twins. So yeah, Pippin. And now I move on to Samwise Gamgee, arguably the best character in the films. I have him like he and Frodo I have as like almost like a pair in the final piece, because like, you know, they're the ones that go off together. So, and I have him standing holding his little, like Frodo's little vial of starlight aloft, because that is possibly one of the coolest like stills of Sam I can think of, because like the stuff that makes him lovable isn't necessarily the action stuff, it's the emotional, softer side of him, like the fact he's a really good friend, but you know, it's kind of hard to get across in a sculpture at this scale, so you know, I just have him holding his little starlight vial aloft. And yeah, and I also gave him his little backpack, which I thought was cute. Now on to the Hobbit himself, Frodo, as played by Elijah Wood. I'll admit, not a huge fan of this character in the films, he kind of annoys me. But like, you know, I know it's the whole like the ring corrupted him and whatever, but yeah, he bugs me. But still, he has some pretty cool character features. Like I have him holding a sting, the sword that he got from Bilbo Baggins. So yeah, and I then sculpt out his little face and stick it on, give him his little cape. then I paint him. I make him very pale because like he basically looks like a dead man walking by the end of the dead hobbit walking, I suppose. But yeah, I give him his dark hair, the darkest hair of anyone, I think. And then again, I use the same colours to do his clothing, and I think he comes out looking super cute. I give him his little blue sword, blue because he's fighting the orcs. And then I go on to making a base for all of this. So I cut out cardboard and make layers of it that like make tiers that get smaller and smaller as you go up, creating a nice like rippling hill effect going all the way up. And this will create places for all the characters to stand on. I did take into consideration how some of the characters are different heights, so to get them all in a place that looks good, I did have to create some pretty distinct height differences in the terrain that they are standing on. I always make an effort to cover all the holes in the cardboard because they're ugly. So I use paper along the back to do that, sticking it on like little hinges to cover all that, and then I cover the rest of it with tissue to make a more of a gradual sloping effect rather than the stiff corners that paper would give. I use another batch of paper clay in order to make a series of rocks that will build up part of the terrain and also give Frodo and Sam something to stand on because they do need to be kind of boosted up, and I wanted them to be slightly separate from the rest of the group. So yeah, I blend in the biggest rock with pieces of tissue because there was a notable gap underneath and I didn't really like that. But I don't really do that for the smaller rocks just because they're so small that you can't really tell that that's an issue. I just build up the terrain going all the way down the sides, just trying to make it look nice and detailed, and I do take into consideration where I might need more space for characters to sit. And then I paint everything. Do like a nice green for the grass, nice foresty green. And I use a muted yellow colour for everything else. Then I stick all the characters in place, taking into consideration like trying to keep things like balanced. So like I have Aragorn and Legolas, who are the two taller characters standing either side of the middle, where Boromir and Gimli are on either side of that because they're shorter characters. Gandalf in the dead centre is the tallest. And once everything's in place, I give everything a nice coating of matte Mod Podge, which both gives everything a nice finish and keeps everything very situated where it is. And with that, we are done. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe if you did. Apart from that, I will see you next week. Bye!